Welcome back to the Worldwide School Psychological Support Project aimed at supporting the mental well-being of teachers and students after the coronavirus pandemic. Chapter 7: How to measure impact of psychological actions and exploit the model of competences included in O1. Module 3: Adopt, write, revise assessment items or tasks. In this third module of our video series on Chapter 7 about adopting, writing and revising assessment items or tasks, we will address how to define success in student performance. Then in a second part we will discuss about how to choose high-quality student learning outcomes, and finally in a third part we will see how to use the available assessment tools and strategies according to the context. Ready? Here we go. Any assessment has a variable impact on student performance. Expectations for success will define the nature of the feedback a teacher will provide to the student. The norm reference grading is the traditional practice used to assess the student performance. It assumes that the collective performance is distributed between students that do very well and others that do poorly. Thus this practice provides more comfort to the teachers. Criterion reference grading is an alternative to norm reference grading. It tends to be used in situations involving performance. In this approach, the teacher defines what performance is expected from the student, namely the student learning outcomes, and describes the performance using action verbs to design criteria. This practice focuses on the description of the essential elements of performance. When performance is assessed, each criterion is judged on a continuum of high to low quality. To support instructional clarity and consistent grading, a rubric is designed including the list of criteria and the expected levels of performance. Performance-based assessment does not presuppose that a percentage of students will succeed or fail, but measures more complex levels of cognition. Therefore, many educators prefer criterion-based approaches compared to norm-referenced strategies. In addition, criterion reference grading focuses more on the development of skills in the context of the discipline's context, which has more benefits for the learning experience over the time compared to norm-based or content-focused approaches. Thus, student performance provides clues to know if instructions were clear or the expectations too high. Let us now turn to our second part: how to choose high-quality student learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are measurable achievements that the learner will be able to understand after the learning is complete. They describe what learners should know and be able to do when completing a course or a program. They must be clear and actionable. They are described in three categories: knowledge, skills and attitudes. The most useful learning outcomes include an action verb that describes an observable action and the performance that the learner is expected to reach. When you have to create your own learning outcomes to assess student performance, you should consider the following tips. First, use language that facilitates understanding of the learner whose performance will be measured. Limit the number of criteria on which your evaluation is based to avoid confusion. Limit the number of levels to distinguish quality of performance to also avoid the multiplication of unnecessary and difficult to distinguish levels. Focus on action verbs. Be specific when choosing it. Find verbs such analyze or evaluate, which is easier to provide evidence. Observe local practices and adapt your learning outcomes to the context if necessary. We now turn to our third and final part: how to use the available assessment tools and strategies according to the context. How to create high-quality multiple-choice questions. Here is a set of tips. Focus on the disciplinary content. Select questions that involves important concepts. Graduate the difficulty by starting with something easier to help the learner gain confidence. Include more challenging items to help differentiate learners who learned the material more effectively. Be specific and write items that depend on course experience and readings. Choose an appropriate number of items. Write clear and understandable items. Avoid providing clues on the correct answer, such as using a pattern of good answers, a long statement, etc. Use distractors, the wrong options, in related content, and include no more than 3 or 4. Avoid using all of the above, or none of the above, as options. Essay questions can facilitate students' development of greater complexity if the questions are well designed. Here are some tips for optimizing the results of essay question strategies. First, write the topic as clearly and concisely as possible. Select the most appropriate verb that corresponds to the cognitive level you expect. Provide clear instructions, for example if the learner can use notes. Develop an objective, measurable scoring guide before you begin grading. Keep the essay anonymous as much as you can to avoid bias. Provide direct feedback on what the learner did well and wrong. Emphasize the improvements that need to take place in developmental feedback. Follow up your feedback and ensure that learner take it into account and use it to improve what pointed out. Consider the results as a basis for revising and improving the question in the future. True-false questions cover a wide range of topics. However, true-false testing offers a 50% chance to have the right answer without really knowing the answer. It may not be very informative about what learners actually have learned. True-false questions should be used when a quick feedback is needed on basic and simple concepts. It is necessary to illustrate concept complexity when a simple answer is not appropriate in complex concepts. Students are encouraged to justify their answers to push more complex thinking. In performance assessment, educators and teachers can evaluate both content and skills. For some assessment experts, this process is described as assessing performance in the context of targeted content. Rubrics are different in their complexity and are used to achieve expected student learning outcomes. It is relevant to make the following distinctions between holistic versus analytic design. Holistic rubrics focus on the quality of the entire performance, while analytic rubrics produce a judgment about the work quality by looking at its component parts such as criteria. Grading in the analytic rubric involves that each criterion contributes to the overall grade. Single use versus generic use. Some rubrics are created in response to a given instructions or a specific project, while some rubrics may be used several times for generic applications. Single opportunity versus multiple opportunity. A rubric can be used to promote an appropriate review approach for projects in need of review. Single points review. This emerging popular design limits the evaluative dimension of the rubric to only 3 levels, as you can see in the example provided here. When you use rubrics, ensure that your rubrics are not too dense with too much information or too complex, and use a clear and appropriate language. Make sure that your feedback is effective and taken into account by learners. Indirect assessment is about gathering information through means such as surveys, exit interviews and focus groups. Indirect assessments focus on perception or opinion. It is intended to collect students' feedback on the learning experience and teaching methods. A Likert scale ranging from 1 to 5 is generally used in indirect assessment to assess the learner's satisfaction. Self-assessment approach, which is popular among teachers, may empower students to take responsibility for the quality of their work and improve the overall learning experience. This module is now over. Your next destination is Module 4, Evaluate the Effectiveness of Assessments. Thank you for your attention. All the WSPS partners hope you enjoy the content of this video series as much as we enjoyed developing it. Keep working hard. See you soon.